The following podcast is an RMG Media production.
A Renaissance woman fearlessly takes risks, commits to self-improvement, and gracefully embraces her weaker days. She understands that her dreams are worth the fight, tears, and pain, prioritizing herself as the most valuable asset in both life and business. Uniquely irreplaceable, she embodies grit, determination, and a warrior spirit, overcoming challenges with battle scars that enhance her beauty. In 2024, it's the year of the Renaissance woman. Time to rise, thrive, and ignite the powerful woman within. Our highly anticipated fourth Renaissance Women's Summit is a value-packed one-day event featuring unparalleled networking, enlightening panels, interactive workshops, and inspiring keynotes led by top-notch entrepreneurs and female leaders. Acquire the knowledge to become a true Renaissance woman in business. Join us at the fourth ever Renaissance Women's Summit on February 24th, 2024. You can use the code podcast to get 20% off your tickets. We'll see you there. Welcome to the Renaissance Podcast, a podcast for Renaissance women
and men
who want to create a modern-day Renaissance in their life and business.
We interview some of the most successful entrepreneurs and share their unique stories.
Are you ready to create your Renaissance? I'm so excited to be with you today.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
You said you're from Kentucky, living in Kentucky.
Living in Kentucky, originally from Alabama.
Alabama, and you have no accent.
No accent.
Which is, I mean, you know, Alabama could go either way, right?
Right.
Which Kentucky too. Let's start with Alabama.
Okay.
What was childhood like for you?
Yeah. So I'm from North Alabama, which is probably hence the lack of accent.
Okay, North Alabama, no accent.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, what about my childhood? What about growing up in Alabama?
I want to know, what was high school like for you? I kind of want to peel back a little bit.
Gosh.
High school's a trying time, right?
Yeah, I would say traumatic. What was high school like? You know, you don't really know who you are. Most definitely your perfectionism is triggered because you're trying to be whoever you need to be liked and loved and popular. So it's really just this kind of figuring out of who you are.
Totally. And trying to figure it out and also form friends and also try to be authentic, because we know that that's sort of what's going to attract the right people, but we don't often really know how to be that because of society and what we think. And it's all just that mental game.
Yes, it is the mental game.
Which as women is so much harder.
It is.
So much louder.
And as a mom too.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And how many kids do you have?
I have 2.
Okay. 6-month-old and
a 12-year-old that I adopted.
Which, how did you just have a baby 6 months ago? Look at you. I'm serious.
Well, thank you.
I mean, and I know from your story, not to just jump all over the place, but you were a single mom for a while.
I was. So I adopted my nephew. So he's my son, but I adopted him when he was 5. And so, yes, I was a single mother, then met my now husband. We dated, married. Now we're married with a 12-year-old and a 6-month-old.
How long were you a single mom?
5 years.
I mean, that's a long time. I mean,
it is.
What was that like for you? Was it empowering? I mean, what was that?
Yeah. You know, I think honestly, it was hard to actually incorporate my husband into our lives because we had our own rhythm and routine. And for me, I've always been someone who gets help. So I had regular sitters so that I could have downtime and friend time. So I wasn't in it to play the martyr. And I think the beautiful thing about being a single mother is there's no one to be resentful of.
Literally.
And I wasn't splitting time with a dad. I mean, I had him 24/7. So it was just he and I. So, it wasn't easy, but we have a lot of good memories.
That's actually a really good point. I feel whenever my husband travels, it's so easy for me to be so angry and just resentful and how dare he?
Right.
Especially when you have a little toddler or just a little in general or a kid in general. But that perspective of I mean, I didn't really know anything else and we just did our thing and figured it out.
Right. There was no one else to think about, right? I didn't have to tell my husband to do this or help with that. And so I just did it all for, it was good and probably somewhat dysfunctional, but yeah, no one to get resentful of.
So at what point did you start to feel and know that you were kind of perfectionist? Yeah. Like at what, like how old were you?
I would say that I knew for sure when I got sober 10 years ago. So that would be the moment that I was like, this is what I'm struggling with. So when I got sober 10 years ago.
So 2014.
Yeah, 2014. Yeah.
That year.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Okay.
June 2014.
Can you speak on that journey? Like what was your, like, what was, was it drinking every day? Was it like what, I know it's different for everyone, the journey.
So for me, my senior year in college, I discovered Adderall. So addiction runs pretty rampant in my family. So I stayed away from hard drugs in college just because I knew that addiction ran in my family. So when I was a senior in college, my boyfriend at the time was prescribed Adderall. Like he was actually ADHD and he knew that I was taking 18 hours, working 2 part-time jobs. And he was like, here, take this. It'll help you study. And it was the perfect drug, right? I could work ridiculous hours. I could be extremely thin without trying, which was really one of my main triggers for it. And so that started a 10-year addiction. So from age 21 to 31, I was intensely addicted to Adderall. Now, no one knew, right? I was climbing the corporate ladder. My responsibilities were getting bigger. My salaries were getting bigger. My team was getting bigger.
You're crushing it.
Right. Everything on the outside looked, quote, perfect. But I was dying on the inside, right? I was like, basically, when you have an addiction, I mean, you're kind of running this like side business behind the scenes that nobody knows about. And so it was consuming a lot of my anxiety, my time, while also being a professional. And so 10 years ago, I made the decision that like, I can't live this way anymore. And there was a other series of events that kind of were put into place. And that's when I started doing a lot of deep internal reflection.
Wow. And but I appreciate that you compared it to the business. It's almost like a side business.
Yeah.
Like it was like there was a strategy behind it. There was like, when am I going to, I'm going to take it and then I'm going to perform in this way and then I'm going to crush it in this way. Like, is that kind of like the mental framework around it?
So for me, I was doctor shopping. So because my tolerance was so high, you can imagine like what level of drug you start with initially is not what you end up with 10 years later, right? Your tolerance continues to go higher and higher. So I was doing things that were illegal. I was going to many different doctors, getting many different prescriptions. Now, in this day and age, you can't really do that. You can't get away with that, just the state systems and how they track it. But it was like the wild, wild west back in the day. You could basically do whatever, basically do whatever
Anything
you wanted.
goes, yeah.
Right. And so it was, this full-time side hustle where I'm going to different doctors, going to different pharmacies, right? Which pharmacy am I going to fill through insurance? Which one am I not? And then the anxiety that I was going to get caught. So it was this, consuming a lot of mental capital.
I mean, yeah. And then that's a 10-year journey.
Right.
Which is like, but also you were successful. You were doing it.
Right.
You were on paper crushing it, right?
Yeah.
And then to your family, to your friends, like look at Vitale go.
Right.
Wow. So I guess I want to know from you because I have close people in my life that are on Adderall.
Yeah.
And, I would just love to know, like, what do you say to, do you kind of, in your practice, in your work, like kind of like mentor people in that space that are really kind of consumed by it? Because I do think it is a pandemic. I do think that like there are so many people, even if it's not widely available as it was, I know so many people on Adderall that are crushing it in their careers, but it can't be a long-term strategy.
Right. So I don't actually consult with anyone on Adderall. Now, lots of people will reach out to me because they've read my book and they're like, oh my gosh, thank you. I feel heard. You give me hope, or I've recently gone off Adderall. So I'll just kind of give them words of wisdom and cheer them on, but I don't do anything in any formal capacity around like Adderall recovery because it's not my area of expertise. But most definitely, I don't think people are talking about it enough. There was a nationwide Adderall shortage and even NPR reported on it. And NPR said it was because there was a rise in ADHD. And I don't believe that to be true. Now, I don't have any data or facts. I just know how addiction is. And there are people who legitimately, yes, have ADHD. So I'm not taking away from that. Even my 12-year-old son is diagnosed with severe ADHD. So I'm not taking away from that. But I think there's a lot of abuse out there of Adderall and like drugs. So I think it's a major problem that we're not talking about. Because again, this national seeking and just the societal seeking of perfection.
So is it actually very addicting? Like, is it more the what it does for you that's addicting versus?
So I think it hits people both. For me, like it was my entire professional identity was wrapped up in it. And I was an extreme workaholic. My entire identity was my career. And so I was like, who am I going to be without this drug? Like, am I actually going to be successful? So for me, it was this identity crisis, this loss of identity, grief around it, and then deep depression. But in terms of like, did I like the high? Probably. But it was more of like this identity that I thought I needed to be or who I could be.
Yeah.
When I was using it.
Yeah. So then coming off of it.
Yeah.
Tell us like about that experience.
Yeah. So, when I realized that I needed to go off of it, I ended up driving myself to rehab like 2 weeks later. And I just went off of it cold turkey. I was actually out of it. So there were no lifelines.
Right.
So I was totally out of it. And I was just depressed. I went to rehab. I went there for 2 weeks and then I did outpatient for 3 months. And for me, I was amazed at the amount of time that I had back in my life because, again, I wasn't running this side hustle anymore. So the getting off of it wasn't hard, like physically on me, but mentally it was pretty hard.
And I feel like a lot of addicts would completely relate to that of like coming off of that and all this time.
Yes.
Which that time becomes like something that can add more anxiety, right? Because you're just like, oh my gosh, like what do I do? So I love that you were like, I have to get help. I'm going to do that. Like, oh my gosh. So then from that point, like, how did we get to this point with your book? Look at you. You're crushing it. I wish we had the book here to show everybody, but we'll link it.
I have one for you and it's in my car.
We'll link it in the show notes and we'll take a picture of it too. Okay. But I would just love to know, like, when did you get to the point where you were like, I'm writing a book about this story and about what,
So being in rehab treatment, and I was honestly the only Adderall addict there. Now, that doesn't mean I'm the only Adderall addict that's gone to rehab, but I was only at that time. And so it felt really alone. Like people were actually minimizing my addiction. They're like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. And I'm like, no, let me tell you how much I took. And then they were like, whoa, how are you even alive? Yeah. And so I felt really alone and I felt really misunderstood. Even going into 12-step programs, I felt like they didn't fit me, like AA. And, did I drink a lot? Yes. And I ended up, quitting drinking at the same time. But for me, I felt really alone. And I just I want to share my message. So I ended up doing that, obviously.
What were the things that you were loving though, being sober? Like what was some of the things that you were like, this is awesome. How could I'm imagining that you just could never look back and go back into that world. Yeah. Because look at you now and just, you seem so, amazing. So you just seem so healthy and mentally strong. And so I just would love to know, like, what are the pros? Sell it to us, yes. The sobriety.
The most wonderful thing was being able to be me. Like I've been hiding this thing for 10 years. Like not wanting anyone to find out. Like this was a lie that I was keeping, right? Like it's not like I was saying I wasn't on Adderall, but I was not including this in information and conversation. So I was able to tell people my story and it felt really liberating. And I would say that would be the biggest bonus, like just being able to be who I am. And also just the path of uncovering who you are.
Can you spot a perfectionist like pretty quickly?
Well, my research shows that 92% of us are perfectionists. So it's basically everyone.
What?
So when I say I can spot someone, like it's showing up differently. I would assume that everyone in your office to some degree has perfectionism. So
qualities and yeah,
just shows up differently for all of us.
Can you speak on some ways that it shows up? Like I would be so curious. Like I'm like thinking of all of us in this office and myself.
So let's start with defining perfectionism.
Yes.
So perfectionism, a simple way of thinking about it is when we hustle for our self-worth. Right? We're hustling for our self-worth, right? If I make you happy, if I people please, if I work this many hours, if I make this certain salary, if I lose weight, right? Let me hustle, then I'll be worthy. It's when we do things for love instead of from love. Right? So I need to say yes to hosting this party because it's going to make everyone, happy instead of being like, you know what? No, I'm overcommitted right now. So again, we're looking outside of ourselves to define who we are. Right? It's when our intuition, our decision-making, our self-trust, all of that is outsourced. We're letting people, places, and things outside of us to define who we are and what we do. And so to heal that, I think is one of the biggest personal journeys any of us can go on because we actually step back into the driver's seat of our life. Right? So instead of perfectionism being the driver, instead of perfectionism being the CEO of our life, we step back into that CEO role. So it can be one of the most powerful journeys to let that go and release your perfectionism.
Wow. Say that line again about love, what you said.
Yeah. So it's when we do things for love instead of from love.
Wow. That's like, there's a lot to unpack with that.
I know.
Because how
Especially
many
if
of us?
we people, yeah, it's like, little moments in our day, we do things for love.
Why do we do that?
But we're conditioned to think that, we've got to make everyone around us happy to be worthy. Or if you don't agree with me, then something must be wrong with me.
Right.
You're not smiling at me in this moment. Something must be wrong with me.
It's like such a mental fuck.
Yes. Total mind fuckery.
Fuckery, right. Because we're just constantly like, oh gosh, she said okay and didn't put an emoji afterwards.
Right.
She hates me.
Yeah. It's like, let it go. Move on. We got too much other things to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Teach us how to get away from that.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, especially as women, there is just so much of this that I see that I've been a victim of and have done. And it's like, it's so unhealthy. And it's like you said, it's so unproductive.
Right. Like when you can let go of perfectionism, it's like me letting go of Adderall, like so much of your life you get back. You have so much more time. But the first step to letting this go is really by first understanding how perfectionism is really showing up for you. And so when I'm teaching this, what I did is I created what Brielle likes to call the Vitale method, but it's 2 types of perfectionism. So there's slow perfectionism and there's fast perfectionism. And so I created this construct to just give us an easy way of really being able to self-identify. So slow perfectionism is a kind of perfectionism that keeps you stuck. So I want you to think about procrastination. You're not delegating in the workplace. You're avoiding crucial conversations with loved ones or colleagues or your direct report, right? You have imposter syndrome. So you're not speaking up and sharing your ideas. You feel like a failure. You feel stuck. So it's a kind of perfectionism that keeps you stuck. Then there's fast perfectionism, which is the people pleasing, always saying yes, unrealistic expectations, workaholism, chronic multitasking, right? Work harder, achieve more. And so it shows up for us in different ways. And most of us are a hybrid. Right?
We're slow. I'm both.
Right? I can procrastinate and I can have unrealistic expectations. Right? I can avoid that crucial conversation and I can say yes to everything. So it's really first by dissecting the different areas of our lives and where am I slow, where am I fast? And then taking one of those pieces and starting to really let it go.
Wow. So it's just learning the way you operate.
Right.
Is there like an exercise that you like talk about in the book, like that we can like, because what if you don't know, like what if it's challenging for you to kind of determine? I mean, I know for me, it's like very clear. I'm definitely both of those things. But you know what's funny? Yeah. Before you got here, I was like, I feel like I'm not a perfectionist.
Right.
But, and I'm sure everyone says that to you.
They do. And then I'm like, well, do you procrastinate? And they're like, yes. And I was like, okay, well, that's perfectionism. So for me, I think it's really powerful because all those things that I've talked about, we don't often identify under the umbrella of perfectionism. And so I feel, or what I've noticed is that when people are like, oh, wow, all of these things that I thought were separate, my perfectionism and my people pleasing and my workaholism and my avoiding of conflict are actually just under the umbrella of perfectionism. There can be a lot of relief. I mean, there can also be a lot of maybe shame and self-criticism, having to really confront the fact that you've been living as a perfectionist. But then this relief and, that's like, oh, wow, they're all connected. And there's power in that because if you can change one area, it's like this domino effect of all of them. And so just starting with one of your perfectionism patterns then has this domino effect on the rest.
So like, let's start with saying yes to everything.
Yeah.
Because that's, speaking to a lot of entrepreneurs on this show, and I think it can really stunt your growth as a person, as anyone in any industry. But I think especially in entrepreneurship, if you say yes to everything, you are never going to get the real needle moving shit done.
Right.
So how do we, I'm speaking to myself, how do we, unlock that and try to like know that we don't have to appease everybody, but also like that mind fuckery, that battle you have in your head of like, but this is an opportunity. And what if I say no and then I miss out on this? And like, that whole thing, which is like the complexity around it.
Yeah. So there are 2 things that you can do. The first is to really, really on a cellular level, start believing that you cannot miss out on what's meant for you.
Drop the mic.
Like you can't. You cannot miss out on what is meant for you. And I would say that mantra has saved me as a business owner. Like when I think about like older, like past versions of me when I first started my business and I'm like submitting proposals to prospects and like hustling for new business. And I'm like so attached to this opportunity and this opportunity. Now I'm like, whatever. I can't miss out on what's meant for me. This is my pricing. This is what it costs to work for me. This is the level of expertise I bring. And you'll either say yes or no. And if you say no, a bigger client's on the way. And if you say yes, hell yes, let's start working together. But it has given me so much more relief because I don't get attached to one thing. And it allows me to just like truly, we cannot miss out on what's meant for us. But perfectionism is the opposite of that. It's like we have to control every single thing, right? That everything is under our control. And so if you can really start living that mantra, for me, so much change has happened in my life from really just believing that you can't miss out on what's meant for you.
Wow. And also there's so much respect I have for people that do say no, which is so interesting when you're in it and you're in that mindset of like, I have to say yes, I have to, But then you watch your idols and people you admire and really successful people and you're like, man, what a badass. Like she said no. Like I have so much respect for that. And it's like, why can't you put your own self into that?
Right.
Like that's amazing. Well, and I hear a lot of people too say, like analysis paralysis, like you were saying, like avoiding, like but that's interesting that that's a form of perfection because you kind of put those people in a bucket of like, well, they're not getting shit done.
Right. So, we procrastinate because we're afraid if we're going to when we start that proposal or that email or that project, that it's not going to be perfect enough. So instead, we carry around anxiety for 2 weeks thinking about it, right? In the back of our subconscious, worrying about it. Oh my God. I mean, we end up getting it done, but it's like, down to the wire. And so we trade, the 20 minutes that it probably actually takes to get done for 2 weeks of anxiety. Or we're someone who needs all the perfect data before moving forward. Or we've got to, solicit all the perfect opinions and input before making a decision. And so it's, again, just done is better than perfect.
Like done is better than perfect.
Get started.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get the first draft done.
I say that in our office all the time because, even though we do social media marketing and saying done is better than perfect can have a little bit of like but it's gotta be really good. And if we're posting it for one of our clients, it has to be amazing. But also it's the same time like, but y'all, they're hiring us to execute. So as long as we have the processes in place, the quality, the expectation, like we're good at what we do, we're going to hit it. And maybe it's not 100, but is anything ever 100% ever?
Yeah.
Because a lot of life is pretty subjective,
Right.
So there's that too.
Well, it's even on your team. It's really identifying like even in your business, what tasks require 100% and which tasks require 85%. And the whatever systems you have in place to achieve 100% have to be good enough, right? Have 2 people prove something and move on.
Right.
Right? Don't get 20 people to do it. Don't spend 20 hours on it, right? Like get 2 people to prove it and move on. Right? Like I give presentations to big companies all the time and I proof the workbook. I get someone else to proof it and then I move on. And I was giving a presentation the other day and I open it and I'm like, there's one typo. And I'm like, well, this is perfectionism or overcoming perfectionism in action. We're going to move on. Because I also know that I did my due diligence. Right? I did the 2 proofs, had someone else proof, and that's all I can do. I'm human.
Exactly. And like people are a little bit more compassionate than you think, right?
Yeah.
Like you live in your head of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get beat up over
and
this.
The people who aren't just need to overcome their perfectionism.
So
maybe a more strict more extreme perfectionist.
So question for you in working for someone that's very perfectionist. How do you navigate that? What is your advice for that? And I'm thinking for me, like I'm thinking of one client that I had years ago that was just awful to work for because she was so much that. And it was almost impossible to get anything done.
Yeah.
But there,
So I get a lot of requests, like either with clients or if you're in a company and your boss, for example, is a perfectionist. People are like, well, I'm working on my perfectionism, but like, what about the people around me? And so you have to obviously continue working on yours. And then it requires like extreme expectation setting and boundary setting and really clear communication, right? Like saying to someone like, I actually don't answer emails after 6 p.m. right? Like I will get back to it like first the next business day. So it's just setting boundaries. And then what happens is because we teach people how to treat us. So of course, like, well, we've been reading your 9 p.m. emails that you send every night of the week. So why would you think that I wouldn't? And so then we have to retrain people, which can be really scary as a perfectionist to tell people like, hey, actually, I'm really wanting better work-life boundaries. So I want to spend time with my family. So I'm not going to be answering emails after 6 p.m. Now, if it's an emergency, text me because emergencies do show up, but it's having those conversations. And then if the person doesn't adapt to that, you have a decision to make, right? Am I going to fire this client? Or am I going to leave this company or get transferred to another department within this company? But truly, you have to decide, like, how do I want to spend the rest of my life? And what standards am I setting? And is this really worth it? Because again, your yeses are, like if you say no to that, then it's a yes to something else, right? Maybe it's a yes to a more aligned client or a yes to a better job for you, a more aligned job. So,
wow. And I can so speak from example, like when you really do set that boundary.
Oh, it's amazing.
It might be scary to do it, right?
Right.
But when you do it, and there's honestly a lot of respect that comes out of it because at the end of the day, we all want boundary.
Right.
I want boundary from client. I want boundary from employer. That's what we need.
Yeah.
And it's just an unlock. But I think it is hard for people to get to that point. I think it's hard for people to just like do it. I feel like it takes, do you feel like it takes a little bit of time and like just like a lot of self-work?
Well, and I think like for me, like you start in the low stakes moments, right? So I do a lot of work around emotional intelligence too, because that's part of this perfectionism, right? Becoming more emotionally intelligent of your strengths and weaknesses and opportunities for growth. And so I was giving this presentation yesterday on being more assertive, right? Because oftentimes as perfectionists, we're not assertive because again, is that people pleasing? Well, hey, maybe you should do this. And I think this, and maybe, just we're not assertive. And so it's, okay, well, if you want to be more assertive, practice it in small stakes moments. So what I mean by that is think about the nightly, what are we having for dinner game, which is my least favorite game of my entire life. It's my least favorite game. And I need to have a system in place to navigate this game, but I don't. But anyway, like every night my husband are like, what are we having for dinner? And then we're like, I don't know, what about this? What about this? And so in that moment, I'd say, you know what? We're getting Chinese carry out. Done. All right. Low stakes moment, practice being assertive, moving on. So for all of these perfectionism things, whichever slow or fast perfectionism pattern is, you start practicing it in the low stakes moment. Same thing with people pleasing, like pause from saying yes in a low stakes moment.
I love that. Like your husband asking you, do you want to go watch the Super Bowl or whatever? If you really don't, I don't know. That's probably a stupid example, but maybe a husband is a bad example because your husband, you're probably comfortable with saying, fuck no. But if it's,
other friends having a Super Bowl party.
Yeah, a girlfriend asking you to go out and you just had a baby 6 months ago and you're like, I'm just tired and I don't want to go to a girls' night. But, we all have those friends and they're maybe not in the season of life that we're in. And, you start kind of having that guilt a little bit and you're just sort of like, but the more you say it, the easier it gets.
Right.
And if someone has a big problem with you, that is on them, right?
Well, it is. And, like if it's a true friend, if they really want to see you, they're going to have a separate conversation with you. And, like your real friends get it. Doesn't mean that they're not hurt or upset by it because they probably want to hang out with you. But yeah, they understand.
And you spoke on emotional intelligence, which I really want to talk about that because I do think that is such a, how do you teach that, right? Like, I feel like a lot of people just have it, right? And some people don't. And I think, just being in a position of leadership and just like feeling like I sometimes have to explain that. And I feel like it's hard to articulate because I do feel like it can be an intuition a little bit, but like, how do you speak on it?
So I do a lot of assessments with it. So I'm a certified emotional intelligence practitioner. And so I do assessments that tell you where you currently are with emotional intelligence. So there's 15 different metrics. And so you just look at where you are and then the different tools for improving your emotional intelligence. So I feel like that's always a good place to start because facts don't lie, right? This is again, there's different ways around different assessments, but this is an assessment. It's a starting point. So that's information, to start. But I think that's a good place.
Yeah. And then being assertive. I really want to unpack that a little bit more because I just think that there is a lot more work that needs to be done in the space of women in leadership positions, being looked at as bitches for saying the exact same sentence that what a man could say to a group of anyone. Like, I just think that there's a lot of that. And so walking that fine line of being assertive, but also gaining respect from whoever you're talking to. Like, can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah. So as women, I feel like we use like qualifying words when we're making assertive statements or quote assertive statements. And so that actually kind of dequalifies, right? Like, oh, I think this is true. Or, hey, I don't want to bother you, but, so we put all these like qualifiers before the actual statement that we're making. And so I think we have to remove all those qualifiers, even though it can be scary. I mean, I'll do it in emails, right? I'm typing and I'm like, I think this is true. And I'm like, no, this is true.
I love it. I would love to email with you.
Of course I'm thinking it because I'm telling you. So this is true. I don't need to tell you I think this is true.
Yeah. You probably don't use emojis in your text.
No, I do love emojis. And that's another thing too, is I'm an exclamation gal. I put smiley faces, like old school smiley faces, the colon and like the parentheses. Like I don't actually do emojis. I'm like totally old school.
I love it.
But for me, I put that in my emails with CEOs and I'm like, this is my personality. And if we're going to work together, we do deep cultural work when I'm working with companies, right? We face really hard issues that organizations and leaders are struggling with and looking at, serious cultural dynamics that have existed by default for a long time. So we're doing like really intense work. And so this is who I am. And I'm very professional. And this is my spin on things.
Well, and you can be, I love that you're saying this because it's like you can be you.
Right.
You can be, if you're a quirky person, if you're, silly, if you're like me, I'm loud, it's like we can be all of those things. We can also be very successful.
Yes.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
What is the most common problem you see with like big CEOs, big leaders, like when these clients are coming to you? Like what is like something that maybe is really hindering their professional growth, their personal growth, the company's growth? Is there a most common thing or is it pretty nuanced like per person?
I have found, CEOs that are more self-aware than others and, ones that have high emotional intelligence and ones that have lower emotional intelligence. I would say that things that like organizations are struggling the most with now, just based on my experience, observations, and conversations are leading through change. Right. So I guess agile leadership is what you would call it. So just leading through change because companies are growing or downsizing. I mean, the only constant is change. So I would say that, and that can trigger a lot of perfectionism and different people's reactions to change. And then just overall how organizations manage performance. Right. And not just like your performance metrics or the systems you have in place to manage performance, but the actual conversations around performance, the follow-up from those conversations, the frequency of those conversations. Because when organizations aren't doing that, then you actually stall the growth of an organization. And people aren't having these conversations because of perfectionism, right? I don't feel equipped to have this conversation, or I just want to avoid this conversation.
Confrontational.
And so I would say those are some of the biggest issues that I'm seeing.
Yeah. And so is it like in having hard conversations more so? I mean, I would assume so. Like if you have to like host quarterly reviews with team members.
Yeah. So I think, that's 50-50. Some people feel very equipped to have the hard conversation and some people don't. So some people are fine with being assertive and some people aren't. It's more so the follow-up of it, the frequency of it, because the people that don't mind having a hard conversation, maybe having it at the quarterly review, but did you have it 6 weeks prior when it needed to happen before the review?
Is your advice to have a hard conversation with someone right when it happens, right when you feel the or to wait?
So I would say that as a perfectionist, probably take a pause, right? Often it's, is it a moment or is it a pattern? Right. So sometimes like just let moments be moments. And then when it turns into a pattern, have a conversation. Or also just take a breath and, maybe you need to assess, process, because as perfectionists, we want to check it off our list. We want it out of our brain and we want to move on. So then we end up bulldozing a conversation, which ultimately ends up we bulldoze a relationship and, could put those sorts of things in jeopardy.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious about you and like, what does life look like being a recovering perfectionist.
Yeah.
Like, what is your life like now? Like, how, like, I mean, 2 kids, married, very successful, busy woman. Like, what does it look like getting away from that too? And just, I mean, do you feel so free? I mean,
I feel free, but I mean, it still afflicts me. The volume is just turned very down on it. Right? Like I teach it because I need it the most. Like my friends are like, well, that's going to be a great story for a training, Vitale. Or, yeah, God's putting you through this experience right now so that you can teach it. I'm like, great. I love that I can teach this. This is going to be great. But truly, I've been through the extremes of perfectionism so that I can teach it. I mean, I've been there, right? I've been through the hardest, worst pieces of perfectionism. So yes, there's so much of me that is free of that. And so it's really powerful, but there's still pieces where, I would say that show up probably mostly in my marriage, right? Even just like not allowing my husband to be human, right? Like holding him to perfectionist standards. Even though I'm able to turn the volume down on that, like it shows up in different ways.
yeah, I feel like we put a lot of pressure on our significant others.
Probably, yes.
Because they're like the closest beings we have. Obviously, our kids are, but it's different.
Closest to our heart.
Closest to our heart. And it's like we want to push them and we want them to, we put them on this pedestal a little bit. And I think they do the same for us, know, but it is that thing. And I know, marriage is just always ebb and flow and learning each other and emotional intelligence and like all of that. So that's so interesting. What is your favorite thing about what you do? Because you really have such great energy. You light up talking about this. I love that it's like so purpose-driven behind what you do because of your history. And I just would love to know, like, of all that you do, what is your favorite thing?
I believe that when you let go of perfectionism, like you remove the limits from your life. Like people think, oh, well, I've achieved so much under perfectionism. Well, maybe you've achieved here. Maybe the sky is the limit. But when you remove perfectionism, you have no limit. The sky is just the beginning. Like anything becomes possible for you. Like when I let go of my perfectionism or started releasing it, right? It's always evolving, but I wrote my book. I met my husband, right? I adopted my nephew. I started my business. I mean, I left corporate America as a single mother with no savings. So there was no one to fall back on if the business wasn't going to work. So there were some scary moments in that first, I would say 18 months of business ownership. And just, true friendships, right? Letting go of friendships that no longer serve me. And so I believe that anything becomes possible. And so for me, it's helping people realize that and being an example that you can do it. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy, right? There's going to be some really tough moments and tough days, but it's all going to be worth it. So you remove that limit from people's life.
It's almost like knowing that there's going to be discomfort, right?
Yeah.
And kind of like settling in, knowing that that's coming. That's so interesting. Was there anything that you did? I keep saying like coming out of it because I know it's always like this, but like, was there any like routine or ritual or anything maybe you still do today that has helped you on this journey?
So I would say gratitude. So truly daily gratitude journaling 85% of the time. So I'm not going to say I do it every day, especially as a new mother or newborn mother, but gratitude journaling has changed my life. Because here's another thing too, is that as perfectionists, we never celebrate, right? We're like on to the next. Oh, I got this huge award, whatever. On to the next. You're like, oh, we just got this new client. Well, what about the next client? And what if I lose it? Like you're never celebrating. And so for me, daily gratitude journaling, but I do it in a different way. So instead of writing the bulleted list that gets super boring, right? Like my family, my career, my kids, my health, my dog, my home, whatever. I do something called past, present, and future gratitude journaling. So what I mean by that is in the mornings, I sit down and I think past gratitude. Like what happened yesterday that I'm really grateful for? Did I have a sweet interaction with my son? Did my husband and I have a date night? Did I overcome something difficult, right? It's not always like the warm and fuzzy stuff that I'm grateful for that happened yesterday. Maybe it's that proposal got declined and you know what? I was okay with it. Proud of my response to it. And then I think about current, like present gratitude. And that's where the bulleted list comes in, right? My family, my health, my kids. And then I think about future gratitude. And that's like where my future dreaming, I'm like, gosh, I can't wait to be a TEDx speaker and, write more books and have these clients and speak on these stages and make this impact and grow our family and do whatever. But that's when I kind of speak my future gratitude dreams into existence. And so that has been really special. And then I also, in that practice, I actually write my prayer. every morning because it allows me to be super present. So I just have my brain a million miles an hour, a million different things going on. So it allows me to be really thoughtful, intentional.
I love that. I love that intentionality of it, like kind of just knowing yourself too, and just knowing these are the things that work for me. These are the things that keep me grounded. These are the things that keep me present. Because it is just, we all just like, I mean, how many thoughts do we have a day?
Right.
I mean, it's like probably a million. Well, tell me about the business. Like, how do we work with you? Like, how does, like, what is the, tell me through like the client process.
Yeah. So I work with clients in many different ways, but my favorite thing is to do group training and group consulting. So working with a group of leaders on an annual basis where we're doing trainings every other month or quarterly, and we talk about topics that are related to perfectionism. So I call it leading with excellence because I believe excellence is the opposite of perfectionism. And so we always start with the work in ourselves. How do we become a resilient leader? How do we overcome our own perfectionism? Right? How do we become more emotionally intelligent? And then we look at how we lead others because who we are is how we lead. So leadership always starts with personal reflection. In fact, I will not do a training that does not start with personal reflection because we've got to have a starting point. We've all got to be on the same page. We've got to be using some of the same language around our own personal growth and professional growth. And then we focus on how you lead others with excellence. How do you overcome perfectionism in your leadership style or in the workplace? Like, how do you tangibly build psychological safety and trust? Because you cannot have a psychologically safe environment and have a perfectionist environment. Those two things can't coexist. And research shows that the number one indicator of a high performance team is a team that feels psychologically safe. And so again, if you want a high performance team, you cannot have perfectionism existing. And then how do you build intentional relationships? How do you communicate more effectively and navigate difficult conversations? So it's a variety of different topics of really looking at what the organization needs. And then there's executive coaching that we do. We do strategic advisory and consulting and even just kind of culture assessments. But it's a lot of fun work and change.
I love all of that. What is the best thing we can do as leaders for our teams? Like, what is the best thing we can do?
Yeah. So I'd say first is doing the work yourself. Like, I'm a big believer that you heal yourself, you heal those around you. And so really start doing the work on yourself and then bring it to your team members, right? If something is really impacting you, right? If it's a workshop or a book or a podcast, like share that with those that you're working with, but the work always starts with us.
Man, that's so true. I feel like I direct like correlation to when I am really focused in on myself, I have a happier group,
right?
Which is like key. I mean, you just said that's the unlock.
Right. And the quote that changed my life, like we're talking about this, like the work starts with us, like the quote that changed my life that made me realize that I needed to get sober was, I see in you what I refuse to see in me.
Wow. I love that.
And that's truly, right? What we see in others, the blame that we're putting in others, the pressure we're putting on others, like we need to really do some reflecting in the mirror.
Yeah, man. And also on the same note, it's like, you can also love others and pour so much into others and see others in this incredible light, but hate yourself.
Right.
And that's when you really got to reel it in and look inward and do that work. And it is work.
It is work.
Man, okay. Well, so many nuggets from you. You are like, I can't wait to pull the sound bites from this episode. Well, the last couple of questions I would ask you, we always ask our women guests the same question every single episode, which is, what is your definition of a Renaissance woman?
Oh, gosh. My definition of a Renaissance woman is a woman who is really in touch with her intuition, who is following that intuition and living life on her own terms.
I love that. That is the vibe for 2024.
Renaissance woman.
That is it. Where can we find you? Like get to know you, get in touch with you, book to work with you, all of it.
Yeah. So I am most accessible on LinkedIn. So it's just Vitale Buford Hardin on LinkedIn. You can find my website or my company's website. It's the Hardin Group. fraught.co, but I would say LinkedIn or even Instagram, social media is the best place to find me.
Amazing. Vitale, thank you so much for coming
Thank
on the
you.
show.
Thanks for having
You're
me.
amazing. And you guys, this is going to be amazing.
Thanks for
We're going
having
to link her book and all the good things that Vitale has going on in the show notes, as well as on social media. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time.